Hello and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores beautiful Quebec City, in Canada. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. Lyla stepped out of her hotel into the cool April morning, and Quebec City greeted her with the particular freshness of early spring. The last remnants of winter giving way to warmer days, the air crisp and clean, trees just beginning to show the first hints of green. The sky was clear and bright, promising a beautiful day for exploring the only fortified city north of Mexico, the place where French colonial history was most visibly preserved. She walked toward Dufferin Terrace, the famous wooden boardwalk that ran along the cliff edge, offering views of the St. Lawrence River and the lower town below. The terrace was already busy with morning walkers and joggers, everyone taking advantage of the mild weather, and as she approached, the Château Frontenac rose before her, impossible to miss. The château was magnificent, a massive hotel built in the style of a French Renaissance castle, with turrets and towers, steep copper roofs, now green with patina, red brick and gray stone, creating dramatic contrasts. Built in the late 1800s, it had become the symbol of Quebec City, visible from everywhere, dominating the skyline with Victorian grandeur meant to evoke New France's colonial past. Lyla walked along Dufferin Terrace, the wooden planks smooth under her feet, the railing offering constant views. To her left, the château rose imposingly. To her right, the terrace overlooked the St. Lawrence River, wide as a small sea at this point, its water gray-blue in the morning light, the south shore visible in the distance, and below, the lower town, with its narrow streets and old buildings climbing the cliff. Other people strolled the terrace, some stopping to take photos, others simply enjoying the walk and the views. A street musician was setting up near the chateau, arranging his guitar and small amplifier, preparing for the day's performance. She walked the full length of the terrace, then turned back toward the ramparts, the stone fortification walls that encircled Old Quebec. The walls dated from the 17th and 18th centuries, built by French and British military engineers, constantly upgraded and modified, now preserved as a National Historic Site and UNESCO World Heritage Treasure. She found the entrance to the ramparts walkway and climbed up, the path running along the top of the walls, offering views both inward to the old city and outward to the landscape beyond. The walls were impressively thick, built to withstand cannon fire, with regular bastions jutting out, strategic positions for defending the approaches. Walking along the ramparts, she passed through Saint Louis Gate, one of the original gates in the fortifications, now a stone arch marking passage between outside and inside the old city. The gate had been demolished in the 19th century, but rebuilt in the early 20th, a recognition that the walls were valuable not just militarily but culturally, defining Quebec City's character. She continued along the ramparts toward Kent Gate, another of the historic entrances, the path taking her around the western perimeter of the old city. The walk was peaceful and contemplative, the height providing perspective, the stone walls solid and enduring, testament to the city's strategic importance in colonial conflicts between France and Britain. Near Kent Gate, She descended from the ramparts and found the entrance to the Plains of Abraham, the historic battlefield where the fate of New France had been decided in 1759. She entered through the Joan of Arc garden, a small formal garden with pathways and flower beds, just beginning to show early spring blooms, crocuses and early daffodils, their colors bright against the brown earth. The Plains of Abraham spread out before her, a vast green space, now serving as Quebec City's largest park. The battlefield was mostly flat, easy to imagine armies maneuvering across it, and interpretive panels told the story of the brief but decisive battle that had given Britain control of Quebec and effectively ended French colonial rule in North America. She walked across the plains, the grass still showing patches of winter wear but recovering, the open space offering views across to the citadel, the massive star-shaped fortress that crowned the highest point of Cap Diamant, built by the British after they took control, never actually used in battle but imposing nonetheless. The park was quiet on this weekday morning, a few joggers on the paths, some people walking dogs, everyone enjoying the space and the spring weather. The trees were still mostly bare but showing that distinctive haze of early budding, the green just beginning, winter's gray giving way to spring's renewal. After crossing the plains, she made her way back toward the old city, finding the Breakneck Stairs, the steep wooden staircase that descended from the upper town to the lower town. The name was apt. The stairs plunged down the cliff face, narrow and steep, and she descended carefully, holding the railing, her legs working against the grade. Halfway down, she paused at a landing to catch her breath and look at the view, the lower town spread below, its buildings pressed close together, climbing up from the river, and beyond, the St. Lawrence stretching away, ships and ferries moving across it, the port active despite the early hour. She continued down, emerging at the bottom onto Petit-Champlain Street, one of North America's oldest commercial streets, now a charming pedestrian way lined with shops and restaurants, the buildings restored and painted in bright colors, the whole street feeling like a step back in time, albeit a prettified version. The street was quiet this early, most shops not yet open, but Lyla enjoyed the peace, the chance to see it without crowds. The buildings were mostly 17th and 18th century, some with stone foundations, others wood-framed, all of them carefully maintained, preserving the historic character while serving modern commercial purposes. She walked the length of Petit-Champlain, occasionally pausing to look in windows, admiring displays of Quebec crafts and art, maple products and winter gear, souvenirs and fine goods. At the end of the street, she found Place Royale, the small square where Champlain had established his first settlement in 1608, the birthplace of French America. The square was intimate and charming, surrounded by stone buildings with steep roofs, a small church, Notre-Dame des Victoires, occupying one side, its simple facade elegant against the morning sky. A bust of Louis XIV occupied the center of the square, the Sun King watching over this distant outpost of his empire. Information panels told the square's history. The fur trading post, the colonial settlement, the markets and commerce, the fires and reconstructions, the constant struggle for survival and prosperity in this harsh climate so far from France. The history was layered and complex. Indigenous peoples and French colonists and British conquerors, all of it compressed into this small space. From Place Royale, she walked to the old port, where the lower town met the river. The port had been modernized, but still maintained its historic character, old warehouses converted to offices and apartments, the waterfront developed for public access with boardwalks and interpretive centers. She walked along the river path, watching the St. Lawrence flow past, its current visible, its water cold from spring snowmelt upriver. A cargo ship was moving downriver, riding high and empty, heading toward the Atlantic. Closer to shore, a ferry crossed toward Lévis on the south shore, its regular route connecting the two cities. The path took her west along Quai Saint-André, the quay lined with old buildings, some still showing their original purpose, maritime warehouses and commercial structures, others now housing restaurants and shops. The architecture was varied but harmonious, different periods and purposes, creating an interesting streetscape. She continued onto Rue Saint-Paul, an antiques district where shops sold furniture and art, vintage goods and collectibles, the street quieter and more residential than the touristy areas, showing the lower town as a living neighborhood rather than just a historic attraction. A small café was open, and she stopped for a late breakfast, ready to rest and refuel. The café was cozy and welcoming, with exposed stone walls and wooden beams, a few tables occupied by locals reading newspapers or working on laptops. She ordered in French, her accent imperfect but comprehensible, requesting a café au lait and a croissant. The server, a woman about her age with kind eyes, responded encouraging Louis grec. Votre français est très bon. Vous êtes ici pour combien de temps? Merci. Just today, unfortunately. I'm traveling through. Ah, too bad. You should stay longer. Quebec City has much to offer, but you chose a good day for walking. The weather is perfect. The café au lait was strong and milky, the croissant buttery and flaky, clearly made that morning. She ate slowly, watching the street through the window, seeing the neighborhood wake up, shop owners arriving, residents walking to work or errands, the ordinary life of the lower town continuing. After breakfast, she made her way to the funicular, the cable railway that climbed the cliff face, connecting the lower town to the upper town. The funicular was both practical and historic, operating since the late 1800s, a steep incline railway that saved the climb back up the stairs. She purchased a ticket and waited for the next car. When it arrived, she boarded along with several other passengers, and the car began its ascent, climbing smoothly up the steep track, the view opening up as they rose, the lower town falling away below, the river becoming more visible, the south shore clearer. The ride was brief, and they arrived at the upper station, Terrace Pierre du Guademont, a small terrace with views and a few benches. From here, she could see across the lower town to the river, the whole geography of Quebec City visible, the cliff dividing upper and lower towns, the river flowing past, the citadel on its heights, the walls encircling the old city. She walked from the terrace back to Dufferin Terrace, wanting to spend the afternoon there, to watch the light change, to see the sun set over the river from this perfect vantage point. The terrace was busier now, afternoon tourists having arrived, but still pleasant, spacious enough to never feel crowded. She found a bench with a good view and sat, content to simply watch and rest, her morning's walking having been substantial. The St. Lawrence flowed steadily below, its water reflecting the afternoon sky. Ships moved across it, ferries and cargo vessels, pleasure boats beginning to venture out as spring arrived. The south shore was clear now, farmland and small towns visible, the landscape rolling and green, snow still visible on distant hills. She watched the light change as afternoon progressed toward evening. The sun lowered, its angle shifting, the quality of light becoming warmer, richer. The chateau cast a long shadow across the terrace, and she moved to stay in the sun, wanting its warmth. Other people on the terrace were clearly waiting for sunset too, positioning themselves for good views, cameras ready. There was something communal about it, this shared anticipation, everyone drawn by the same beauty. Cameras ready. The street musician she'd seen in the morning was performing now, playing classical guitar, his case open and partially filled with coins and bills. His playing was skilled and emotional, drawing a small crowd, people stopping to listen, some sitting on nearby benches, the music adding to the atmosphere. As the sun approached the horizon, Lyla stood and walked to the railing for an unobstructed view. Key. The sky was beginning its transformation, the blue deepening, hints of orange and pink appearing along the western horizon where the sun would set. A family stood nearby, parents and two children, and she overheard the mother explaining to the kids about the St. Lawrence River, how it connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, how it had been the highway for explorers and fur traders, how Quebec City had grown here because of its strategic position where the river narrowed. The children listened with the half attention of youth, more interested in leaning over the railing and watching boats, but the mother's voice was patient and warm, seizing the teaching moment, connecting them to the place's history and geography. The sun touched the horizon, and the colors intensified, orange and gold spreading across the western sky, pink and purple appearing higher up, the clouds catching fire. The St. Lawrence reflected it all, becoming a mirror, the water glowing. People fell quiet, watching, the moment too beautiful for unnecessary talk. Even the children stopped their chatter, drawn by the spectacle. The street musician continued playing, his music a perfect soundtrack, classical and contemplative. The sun slipped below the horizon gradually, the colors reaching their peak and then beginning to fade, softening to pastels. The chateau's copper roofs caught the last light, glowing green-gold, dramatic against the darkening sky. As twilight settled, the lights along the terrace came on, creating a different kind of beauty, warm and welcoming. The chateau was illuminated, its turrets and towers dramatic against the night sky. The lower town's lights began to appear, marking streets and buildings, creating patterns. Lyla remained on the terrace as evening arrived, not quite ready to leave. The temperature dropped with the sun's departure, the spring evening turning cool, but she was dressed warmly enough, and the view was too good to abandon yet. She thought about the day, about walking the ramparts and crossing the Plains of Abraham, descending the Breakneck Stairs, and exploring the lower town, riding the funicular back up, and watching the sunset. Quebec City had revealed itself in layers, the fortifications showing its military past, the architecture displaying French colonial heritage, the river explaining its strategic importance, the modern life demonstrating its continuing vitality. The city was unique in North America, she reflected, the only walled city, the strongest connection to French colonial history, the place where European fortress design and North American landscape had created something distinctive. Walking its streets felt like walking through history, but living history, not museum piece preservation, the old buildings housing modern businesses, the ramparts serving as parks, the past integrated into present life. The fortifications had been meant to protect, to define inside from outside, to create security through strong walls and strategic positioning. Now they defined the city's character, created its distinctive identity, made it a destination for people wanting to experience this preserved fragment of colonial America. She walked slowly back toward her hotel, through streets now fully in their evening aspect, restaurants open and filling with diners, shop windows lit, music drifting from bars, Quebec City's nightlife beginning, the old streets taking on new character and artificial light. She passed the chateau once more, now brilliantly illuminated, its castle-like silhouette sharp against the dark sky. She walked along narrow streets, where stone buildings rose on both sides, their windows glowing warm, creating intimacy and shelter. At her hotel, she went to her room and opened the window, letting in the evening air, cool and fresh, carrying the sound of the city, voices and music, the distant rumble of traffic, church bells marking the hour, the complex soundtrack of urban life. She stood at the window, looking out at the street below and the buildings rising beyond, thinking about Quebec City's peculiar character, its successful preservation of heritage, its French language and culture persisting in an overwhelmingly English-speaking continent, its walls defining not just physical space but cultural identity. The fortified city, they called it, and the walls were both literal and metaphorical, protecting not just against military threats but against cultural erosion, maintaining distinctiveness, preserving history while remaining relevant, a delicate balance that Quebec City seemed to have achieved through conscious effort and fortunate circumstance. Early spring in Quebec City was ideal, she decided. The winter severity passed, the summer crowds not yet arrived, the city in that transitional moment, when everything was waking and renewing, when light returned and warmth increased, and the promise of growth was everywhere. The trees budding, the river flowing, the stones of the old buildings warming in the sun, all of it speaking of continuity and change, history and present, the fortified city standing as it had for centuries, adapted but enduring, welcoming visitors, while remaining essentially itself.